And then now you have all these black people who have all these different health issues, and some, how many you want to bet that were pregnant at that time that ingested some of those chemicals that it actually harmed their kids, and their kids had to grow up with more difficulties because those chemicals got into their system and altered their biochemistry. And they were considered problem children when they were in school. And then it gave people this preconceived notion that, oh, well, black kids, they're just unruly. This is why we got to put them in detention and suspend them all the time. This is why we have to have SROs, school resource officers, and all up in our schools just to be able to keep monitoring on them, because they just can't control themselves. When in reality, they're poisoning us, that are affecting our prefrontal cortex, that are affecting the parts of our brain that control emotion and impulse control. And if you injected, or if you put these same agents and chemicals in white children, they would turn out the exact same way. In the past, in the United States, there has been experimentation that has happened to the black community that has resulted in many health problems that have happened to us in the past, that has affected us even down to this day. You had experimentation from who they call like the father of gynecology, that has tested on black females in order to figure out the female body. He's done it with female enslaved Africans who are our ancestors, who were experimented on without anesthesia. You have experiments that were done on people in prison, particularly black men incarcerated in prison, and they underwent experimentation and without compensation for that experimentation on them, which have left their bodies damaged. We also have the famous Tuskegee experiments that were done on the people of Tuskegee, and how they were told that they were being treated for syphilis, but then they weren't being treated. And this has resulted in them leading lives of physical deterioration because of these Tuskegee experiments, really because the US government just wanted to see the effects. And they did it with people not knowing what they were going through, not knowing that the United States was experimenting on them for negative effects. We see it institutionally in this country, where they have actually took the cells of Henrietta Lacks and have used her cells in testing for many different types of ailments, but compensation was never given to the family of Henrietta Lacks. I talked about that last year. But now we have something new. And what has happened in St. Louis, Missouri is nothing short of outrage inducing. Chemical experiments on black people in Missouri. Let's get into this, because this is really important, and everyone should be outraged at this. And I want people to share this with everyone they know, because it could be happening in our city today, or it could be happening, it could have happened, a few years ago, and we may still be experiencing the effects of it now.
The fog drifted through the streets like a ghost.
That's exactly what it looked like, a thick fog. It was summertime, it was hot. We would just run through it as fast as we could and try to just cool ourselves off. It stuck to you.
The spray was so foul as far as the odor. It made some of us have headaches, nausea, dizziness.
That's what I remember. It made me sick.
It wasn't the weather, it was an eerie smoke descending from rooftops, rolling from the backs of trucks.
Regular flatbed truck, but it had a big machine on the back, and it had a big nozzle that really sprayed a fog you couldn't even see through. It was that thick, and it really we felt it as it would adhere to our skin. And as far as the guys on top of the buildings, they tried to portray them to us as maintenance workers. But we was like, what is a maintenance worker doing? And basically a hazmat suit. And
That's how you know something's wrong. If somebody's a maintenance worker and they got a hazmat suit, my first sign is get out of Dodge. But when you're economically displaced, can you do that? No. And a lot of times people will say, well, just move to a different area. Well, in the period that we're talking about, there was a lot of redlining, so you can only move to so many different areas. So essentially, you were trapped, as we'll see. This is crazy. But this is what the United States has done to Black people, particularly to freedmen. And we got to talk about it, because the thing is like, history is not comfortable, but it is necessary to know in order so that we do not repeat the sins of the past. But if they're not going to talk about it, then they're going to repeat it. It is our job to make sure that it doesn't get repeated. This is why we need to keep speaking out. Let's continue on.
And they had masks and goggles.
In the 1950s and 60s, in secret, the U.S. Army sprayed zinc cadmium sulfide into the air of a St. Louis housing project, a largely Black neighborhood called Pruitt-Igoe.
It was a lose-lose situation for us in Pruitt-Igoe. We were subjects.
They didn't ask for our permission. We didn't ask for them to spray us. My government used me like I was a guinea pig.
We're standing at where Pruitt-Igoe used to be here in St. Louis, and it's hard to believe more than 10,000 people used to live here. As we bring our drone up, you can see it's mostly just an empty lot now, overgrown with trees. This used to be filled with 33 high-rise buildings. It was all demolished in 1976. And according to the National Research Council, St. Louis was chosen for spraying experiments because it had similar characteristics to Soviet targets like Moscow in terms of population density and terrain and proximity to a river.
So this was also part of the Cold War. Experimenting on Black Americans in order to test to see how badly it would affect the Soviets. What does this remind you of? What did they say about Palestine? It's the testing ground for what? What they want to do here at home? Guess what? We were also the testing ground of what they could do abroad. Sometimes people will say, well, oh man, this stuff that the United States is doing is going to come back home. Baby, it originated here and we were the subjects. Our ancestors were the subjects. Also, by the way, let me ask you something. And maybe this might be my tinfoil hat moment for this particular show. But you remember what happened in Flint, Michigan with the water? About how they had extreme levels of lead in the water. Do you know what lead does to the human body? It also, one of the things that lead does is that it causes, especially in children, for the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment, right? And impulse control. It damages it so it doesn't develop fully. Also, it also affects parts of the brain where things like anger and emotions are controlled. Therefore, making people more violent. One would think that you would want to get that lead out of that water and fix those pipes and put the water back the way it was as quickly as possible, expeditiously. But yet they didn't. They were very slow to rebuild it. And it's still not fully back to the way it's supposed to be. Almost as if the United States said, hold on, wait a minute. We know exactly what lead does. Let it ride. And the prison industrial complex, especially those private prison corporations, like, wait. Don't fix it just yet. Do it slowly. How many kids failed the state exam in the 3rd grade? Okay, we need to build that many more prison beds and cells. All right, let's build it. All right, government, hey, pay us up. We're going to take those kids in juveniles. And then guess what? It's a feedback loop because they put that in your system. And the thing is, like, they'll do it, and that will have the same effect on any human being. But they do it particularly in what? Black areas. Why? Because guess what? You have people have a preconceived notion of what they think about Black folks in this country. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because the United States, well, what they do is that they'll allow things like this to happen in our communities. And then they go, see, these Black people, they're violent. They can't control themselves. They're ratchet. They're ghetto. They can't take care of themselves. We need more crime prevention. We need more police in these areas. We need to send the National Guard. Meanwhile, they're poisoned. And so as you can see, what's happening in places like St. Louis. What do they do here? You have men in hazmat suits spraying chemicals in Black neighborhoods? Let's continue on.
The government now admits to a secretive series of Cold War tests, including one dubbed Large Area Coverage. More than 30 tests conducted across the US and Canada, spraying zinc cadmium sulfide from planes, rooftops, and vehicles to simulate how a biological attack might spread, all to prepare for potential warfare against the Soviets.
Many of us been in the military and had top secret clearances. We know how it works.
We have died for America. We have fought for America.
You are a veteran.
I am United States Air Force veteran.
Dr. Starks, you're a veteran as well.
Yes, I am. I'm an Air Force veteran also.
Is there a sense of betrayal here?
Definitely.
They want to know if those secret tests have anything to do with what they're observing with their own eyes.
I lost my 2 older siblings to cancer. I lost a brother last month.
I've been diagnosed recently with a rare form of lymphoma.
I had cancer of the left kidney, had partial removal of my left kidney.
News Nation.
And people, and they refuse to give us universal health care. Why? It is well documented that they refuse to give us universal health care because of white supremacy, because they want to make sure that we died off. Hell, Tom Hartman actually talked about that. And so when we talk about when Black people talk about that they don't trust the healthcare system, when Black people talk about they don't trust the government, here are the material reasons why. Now, some people will look at me and go, well, that's just the government. This is the problem. This is why government has to get out the way. And the problem is that they don't think that who owns our government? Is it us? No, because if we actually own our government, then we would be able to make sure things like this don't happen. But no, we don't own our government. It's the corporations. Because who made that gas? Who made those chemicals? Who made them? Who has a profit incentive that they get used and bought by the government? Who has an incentive to treat illnesses but don't cure them? It's the corporations. The corporations are the reason why our government is the way it is, because they, who are the descendants of the robber barons, have and continue to own our government, and they don't do a damn thing because they want to make sure that we stay displaced. And what do you do in order to keep the working class divided? You make one side of the working class just a little bit better than the other. So therefore, there's always hierarchy. Even when it comes to material things like health. And then people will look down at Black people and go, you guys just don't take good care of yourselves. Look at what you're eating, things like that. Look, they eat all manners of fat. They eat all manners of carbs. And places like France, they eat rice every damn day with every meal, in places like China and in Japan. And they are thin. And they're healthy for the most part. Why? Is it because they don't eat fried food? Oh, no, they fry. Oh, they fry. But what is it? Oh, it's as if our government is allowing these corporations to mess with the food or have chemicals that are sprayed on us that ends up messing our health up. This is why we're jacked up now. And so when people say, oh, government's the problem, that's like saying guns are the problem. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. By that very notion, if you take you replace bad people who run government with good people who run government. Basically, the bad people who run government are corporations. The good people who run government are workers. That's why you need to have a worker-centered government. But the problem is that the corporations who use the Democrat and Republican parties do not want that. And then now you have all these Black people who have all these different health issues, and some, how many you want to bet that were pregnant at that time that ingested some of those chemicals that it actually harmed their kids? And their kids had to grow up with more difficulties because those chemicals got into their system and altered their biochemistry. And they were considered problem children when they were in school. And then it gave people this preconceived notion that, oh, well, Black kids, they're just unruly. This is why we got to put them in detention and suspend them all the time. This is why we have to have SROs, school resource officers, and all up in our schools just to be able to keep monitoring on them, because they just can't control themselves. When in reality, they're poisoning us, that are affecting our prefrontal cortex, that are affecting the parts of our brain that control emotion and impulse control. And if you injected, or if you put these same agents and chemicals in white children, they would turn out the exact same way. Hell, they're probably doing it in poor white neighborhoods right now. Look at East Palestine. That's mostly white neighborhood. But that was because of a train derailment. You literally have the U.S. Army actually doing an experiment on Black Americans in order to test to see what they could do to a socialist country. Man, I'm telling you.
Reached out to the Army for answers. They provided a one-page response. It says the Army's own Center for Health Promotion and Preventive Medicine investigated in 1994 and found inhalation exposure would not pose a health risk. They also cite later corroborating reviews, including a 1997 review by the National Research Council. Perhaps they assumed we wouldn't read the NRC's 380-page report, but we did, and the Army's statement doesn't show the full picture. In that 1997 review, the National Research Council explicitly says repeated exposure to zinc cadmium sulfide can cause kidney or bone toxicity or lung cancer if levels are high enough. And they admitted they couldn't fully assess the risk. Why? Because some Army records remain classified, it says, for national security reasons. More troubling, key Army exposure records were missing. And when the NRC asked the Army to supply them, the Army said it couldn't find them. Finally, the NRC considered conducting its own study, but concluded it wasn't feasible. In short, it did not test the site, collect samples, or test residents, and they didn't have access to all the data. Their review was based on what the Army gave them, and what the Army either could not find or withheld. The Army ends its statement to News Nation by saying, quote, none of the reports contained evidence of a radioactive component to the zinc cadmium sulfide dispersion tests. Residents say the secrecy and delays are no accident.
They're waiting us out.
They're waiting on all of us to die.
But that's not even the whole story, as residents demand to know what else could have been in that spray.
What that man said was so true. He said they're waiting for all of them to die. This is also what's going on with reparations. They wanted all the slaves to die, so everybody has an excuse to go, well, you're not born a slave, so therefore we can't pay you reparations. When in reality, the effects of intergenerational debt and disenfranchisement continue down to this day. So no, reparations still needs to be paid because of the debt that's owed. And as long as the United States government still exists, it still owes that debt. And they want people to die off so that they can't testify and go, hey, you harmed me. And you don't think that didn't have an effect on their kids? Especially if they affect them medically? What if it was passed down on to them? And also, what if it affected them mentally? You also have to account for that too. Those medical bills, guess what? They also have to, they also have to account for that. All that.
They have not come clean with what was in there.
Do you believe that it was just zinc cadmium sulfide in that spray?
No.
No.
We go to the source, a researcher who has spent decades declassifying government documents about these tests.
Do you believe the U.S. government sprayed some kind of radioactive material on the residents of St. Louis?
I believe that they did.
And the government's surprising response to our request to declassify information.
I mean, what the hell?
Plus, renowned activist Erin Brockovich weighs in.
Do you think there's been a lie here, a cover-up here?
It sure looks that way.
The residents are asking for an apology from the government for being experimented on. They are asking for compensation, for health studies for themselves and their children. They're also asking for transparency. They want the government to release all the documents about the spraying. So, Elizabeth, tomorrow night on your show, we will go on a journey to try to declassify the one government document that a key researcher tells us she has never been able to expose. And we take the investigation to Erin Brockovich. For the residents still here, still fighting, the question is whether they will get any answers before it's too late. Elizabeth.
Well, there
And yes, they deserve reparations for that. But this is tale as old as time when it comes to Black Americans being experimented on en masse. It's happened to a lot of us. Happened to a lot of our family members. My goodness. And the best way to be able to combat this is to change the system. But the problem is we have to walk away from not just both parties, but we have to change the system on a material fundamental basis. Let's get even deeper into this, because there was an article that was also written, and it goes just a little bit deeper. And I would like to share that as well. It's funny how people would be like, the government would never. Right. Let me share this. Okay. It says a researcher's request. The sociologist, I'm sorry, the mystery might have stayed buried if not for Dr. Lisa Martino Taylor, the sociologist, researcher, and retired faculty member from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, spent decades of her career trying to piece together what happened, combing through thousands of declassified files, pushing for the release of the one that remained secret. It all started, she said, when two people approached her separately, a colleague with breast cancer and a neighbor who had developed a brain tumor. Both told her they had remembered spraying from their childhoods. My neighbor said, I was treated for a brain tumor about a decade ago, and I think it was related to something that happened to me when I was little. And I said, well, what was that? And she said, I was sprayed on the playground at a school in St. Louis. And I thought, how can this be? These two people don't know each other, and they were coming to me days apart with the same strange story. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought, this is just really difficult for me to believe. Martino Taylor promised she looked into it anyway, and when she began digging, the paper trail stunned her. What the military had told people, at least officials in St. Louis, was that they were going to conceal these cities under a cloud in case of Soviet attack. That was just sort of a veneer, a cover story, if you will. They were not at all telling the truth about what they were actually doing and what they were doing it and why they were doing it. She believes it was part of a much larger coordinated study that the Army Chemical Corps were responsible for, that involved the production and testing of radiological weapons. Martino Taylor said her research reveals the very men who designed the St. Louis test were experts in radiological warfare. Brigadier General William Creasy led the Army Chemical Corps and branch leading America's secret radiological weapons program during the Cold War. He brought Philip Layton, his top chemist, who was the Army's leading authority on using radioactive particles in aerosol form, fog-like clouds designed to drift over enemy terrain. So there he is. Says, yes, he was the expert. So Martino Taylor's work revealed chilling details from that area when the U.S. government conducted human experiments on its own people in the name of preparing for the Soviet threat. American children in state-run institutions like the Fernald School were fed radioactive oatmeal as part of a studies by MIT sponsored by the Atomic Energy Commission. Children were fed radioactive oatmeal. Children. What? This is evil. And people think about, like, what's going on in Gaza right now and saying how the United States is willing to fund it. Just think about the history of the United States. The United States literally has a history of genocide on this land and kidnapping and genociding Black Americans as well as Native Americans. Would it be that far of a jump? Would that be that far of a leap for them to test unethically on children without anybody knowing? Or at least without parents and community members knowing? Let's continue. The children, some of them orphans, were told they join a science club and were promised a quart of milk a day, a trip to a baseball game, a trip to a beach. A copy of the 1994 congressional hearing shows that those children, now grown, describing being told that oatmeal was just vitamins and recalling the health problems that followed: lumps in my arms, my stomach. God. Says pregnant women were also unknowingly given radioactive iron at top hospitals in Tennessee and California to study how radiation crossed the placenta. Some later reported miscarriage, illness, or birth defects. A class action lawsuit resulted in a settlement in the 1990s. We know that they were giving radioactive cocktails to pregnant women. We know that they were feeding radioactive oatmeal to children in state schools. They've admitted to those things, and they won't release the material related to St. Louis. Oh my gosh. Martino Taylor worked to declassify previously hidden documents, including Army records, and synthesize public records and articles related to the era of U.S. government testing. That was one of the things that really stood out to me in all of the radiological weapons experiments, that they were layers of secrecy. It was an offshoot of the atomic bomb project. And a lot of the people who were working in the early formation of the radiological weapons experiment were involved in the atomic bomb project. It was a 4-pronged program. They wanted to do ingestion, inhalation, injection, and full body scan on humans. As she went deeper, she said she almost needed to adopt the lexicon of a code breaker. The language was purposely veiled and obfuscated. Oh my gosh. What was sprayed in St. Louis? When she asked if she believes the U.S. government sprayed some kind of radioactive material on the residents of St. Louis, Martino Taylor answered plainly, "I believe that they did. There's so much contextual evidence that points that way." She examined who was involved in the development of St. Louis tests and found Creasy and Lighton. For Lighton's part, in addition to his role at St. Louis spraying test, he was also the director of operations at Dugway Proving Ground, a remote secretive facility in Utah. Used to be the Army to test chemical and radioactive materials. It was the Army Chemical Corps' main site for experiments with chemical and radiological weapons, including open-air releases to show how they spread. Martino Taylor was disturbed to find out not only about Layton's dual role, but also evidence the data from St. Louis was gathered and then directly compared with Dugway Proving Ground. It says in 1952, they were looking for a city to test their offensive weapons program. They wanted to do it. They expressed this in documents. St. Louis was their chosen city. That was their analog city to Moscow. They wanted to do this in 1953. They showed up in 1953 in St. Louis. I'm telling you right now, some of these people were my uncle's age. 1953? Yeah. My uncle's age, around my mom's age. These people are in their 70s. Maybe some of these people are in their 80s. If you were a kid in 1953, and then You think if that was your parents or your grandmother or grandfather, and then they died prematurely from health complications, could it have been from these experiments that they had no idea that was done to them? And what if you lost that family member? Shouldn't you be compensated materially for, wrongful death by the government? What did the Army know? The substance the Army admit to spraying is a chemical called zinc cadmium sulfide, which contains cadmium, now known to be a human carcinogen. But did the designers of the study know at the time that the chemical they were using to fog more than 10,000 Americans could be harmful to their health? Martino Taylor said that she believes they did. Philip Lighton was very well aware that cadmium was problematic. Using cadmium sulfide was toxic, and he was open about that. Even at the time, they knew this was toxic. So they knew all this. And now they're supposed to be fighting. They spoke to Wesley Bell, the Zionist lapdog. Says when American citizens have been impacted and exposed to chemicals specifically because of the federal government, I think that we should, as Democrats or Republicans, we should do the right thing and make certain to make these folks whole again, get them the compensation they deserve and the treatment that they need and also deserve. Bell is now fighting to get Pruitt-Igoe residents included in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, but these residents are currently unable to prove radiation exposure, and they say key records that could help clarify that was contained in the spray remain classified or missing. I mean, I'm glad that he's at least putting up a fight for this, but at the same time, he can't be bothered to call, for a weapons embargo to stop what's going on in Palestine. Yeah. This is very disturbing. And if you're outraged by this, I'm glad. Because many of us in the Black community have been hearing about stuff like this all the time. This is also why a lot of Black people believe about this talk about chemtrails. I remember being young, 8, 9, 10 years old, playing outside in the apartment complex. And I would see way up in the sky, and I would see a plane, and I would see it blowing clouds out the back. And I would see it, and I didn't think much of it. Or sometimes I would wake up in the morning, and I would see these lines in the sky crisscrossed over my neighborhood. And then next thing you know, you wouldn't think about it ever again. Hell, even Prince talked about this. Prince. He talked about this with Tavis Smiley about chemtrails. How he said that he saw these planes fly in the sky, letting out these agents, and then next thing you know, in a few hours, everybody would be pissed off and angry at each other. Like something happened. Who was it? Oh my God, the comedian activist name. I'm blanking on his name. Oh my gosh. He talked about manganese. If any of you guys know, please help me out. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. He was a comedian and activist. But he talked about the chemicals that would be released in the black community. And so this is the side of the US government that a lot of people don't know. And we talk about this stuff all the time in the black community because we live it. Dick Gregory, yes. It was Dick Gregory that talked about that. The manganese, yep. And this is why it's so important for us to change this system, because we should not have a system where they try to test us against our will, against our consent. And this is all for warfare. This wasn't to improve our health. This was all for warfare. This is why the military industrial complex just doesn't affect soldiers. It affects citizens. It affects us. This is why this system needs to go. Because ending this capitalist system will also provide liberation for American freedmen and everyone else in this country who are black, brown, and any other marginalized group in this country. It will provide liberation for all of us because we got to get rid of it. Toss it all out. Share, this information with family, with friends. Let them know, because this has to stop. Thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate it from the top and bottom of my heart. If you'd like to see any more, you can look here. 1.